buenos días, buenos días. Conecten al café aquí Alexandra Moya desde el Comité Hispano de Cleveland. Y estoy bien contenta y nerviosa a la vez porque es nuestro primer podcast en inglés. Brr.
Yay.
And I feel so proud today that I'm here with attorney Moná Scott and judge as well for the city of Cleveland. She is our administrative judge of Cleveland Housing Court.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Bienvenida.
Thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure. And we're going to be discussing some housing issues from a legal perspective. And I have the perfect person in here. In this episode, I will we will have some kind of translation at the end so you guys will be able to understand. So, Judge Scott, can you introduce yourself and let us know a little about you?
My name is W. Moná Scott. I'm the administrative judge for Cleveland Housing Court. It is a division within Cleveland Municipal Court. So we have two divisions, general division that has 12 judges, and housing court only has one judge, which is me. It's one of the busiest courts in the state and almost in the country. Very high volume, very busy. A little bit about me. I was a former City of Cleveland prosecutor, former Cuyahoga County prosecutor, and then also the Fair Housing Administrator for the City of Cleveland before being elected.
Oh, wow. So can you imagine? We have the perfect person here. One thing that we sent out some questions for the community, but before we go to those, I would like to know from you what is that you commonly or frequently seen from the Latino community in your room, in your court.
Okay. So to explain the court a little bit, we have a civil division and a criminal division. So civil mostly deal with the eviction process and also motion to compare repairs, temporary restraining orders if someone's lights or water get cut off because the landlord say you're not paying bills. They, can't do that. So you would come to Cleveland Housing Court to get a temporary restraining order or TRO. And then also rent escrow. So they deal with those kind of issues on the civil side. Criminal side, we mostly deal with homeowners. And also there is some in the Latino population that are also investors and landlords that have multiple properties. So making sure that the property that they are renting out is in code compliance and that they are adhering to things like rental registration, lead safe certificates, and paying their property taxes.
So, nuestra jueza aquí está básicamente dándonos un recogido, ¿verdad?, de cómo funciona la corte, de cómo se divide desde una perspectiva civil y una perspectiva criminal. Civil es mayormente lo que un tenant, ¿verdad?, una persona que está alquilando una propiedad, que se aseguren que todos los derechos civiles sean respetados. Y en la parte criminal, obviamente, pues ya dueños de casa, inversiones, etcétera. Le voy a también a preguntar a la jueza que estamos escuchando todo el tiempo lo que es fair housing, lo que es vivienda justa, pero lo queremos escuchar desde su perspectiva. Judge Scott, I would like to know from a legal perspective also, what is fair housing? What is that terminology that we hear constantly, as well as affordability? Mm-hmm. But in reality, I don't think people really understand, and it's very hard for people from our background to understand those terms.
Okay. So fair housing, although we don't deal with it in the court, it is saying that certain protective classes have a right to housing, to have fair access to housing without being discriminated against. So some of the protective classes are gender identity, marital status, familiar status, anything religious, And, we also have, I think the city of Cleveland adopted income status. So, how some places say no Section 8 here. Now, it's a protected class that you can't discriminate because I am paying with the assistance of a voucher. So those are some of the things that fair housing alone deal with. And it also is about accommodations, right? People having the right to be accommodated when they come into certain spaces. So when I used to be a fair housing administrator, I used to tell people, landlords, that if someone is on disability and they get their payments on the 15th of the month, why not, and they're pretty good tenants, why not accommodate them and allow them to pay their rent by the 15th of the month or the 16th and not the 1st, where they're going to incur late fees because they have not paid their rent based on when they receive their fixed income payments or disability payments. So it's just really having a conversation with everyone about people's rights and to protect those rights. Some of the things that I used to see landlords do is say, when they're marketing for places for rent, this is an ideal place for a single couple. Well, that's familiar and marital discrimination. So you really have to be just general and say, this is an ideal house. It has a large backyard, 3 bedrooms, and just leave it like that. Also, when they are renting or preparing to rent, it's I don't want to say, it's a misunderstanding, because if you have 3 kids and you have a 2 bedrooms, or you have 4 kids, you have a two bedroom, they'll tell you, well, you have to have a space for the sexes have to be apart. They can't sleep in a room together. And no one has authority to tell you that. It is whether there is space, square footage for 5 people to live in that space. That's the only thing that matters.
Oh, we didn't know that.
Right. And a lot of people don't. It is, what do you call it? I'm trying to think of the word. I don't know. My mind just went blank. But it's false, because everyone believes, I have to have a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom for me, and 1 for my daughter and 1 for my son. No, you can literally get a 2-bedroom, and your son and daughter can sleep in the same room. No one should be in the business of knowing what's going on in the house unless you are with Children and Family Services. They can come in and say that, but they're the only ones.
And I'm sure if they come to determine that, it's because of the things that are happening.
Absolutely.
Interesting. We didn't know that. And interesting also is what you were mentioning about we need to rent an apartment to a single or a couple, like that happens in the 70s when it was a lot of discrimination about races, and we don't want this community to live certain amount of Afro-American, or we don't want Hispanic, and that happens. I mean, had to determine at one point this is discrimination and it's against the law.
Right. When I first moved here, one of my things as a first year law student was a housing I want to say observer, or I forgot the title they gave us, but they used to give us a script, and they would find randomly houses that were for rent. And so sometimes the script would say you're a single mom with 5 kids, you have a high school degree, and then you make these phone calls. And I would spend more time on the west side. It was a very awesome way for me to learn Cleveland also. This is before GPS. So this was MapQuest.com, and we were printing out directions.
We were printing out.
I can say Cleveland is very easy to navigate because of the number of streets. We don't have that in the South. We have 26 Peachtree streets in Atlanta. So it could be Peachtree Street, Peachtree Road, Peachtree Avenue. You're just walking around in circles pretty much. But here, it's West 4th, 5th, 6th. So I'm thinking, I moved up here in 1999. This is 1999. No, surely no one is discriminating. But woe and behold, I would literally be told, yes, the apartment is open because, we can disguise our voice and go up an octave and just, speak a certain way. And then you go to the West Side and literally you'll see the sign for rent and they'll say, we just rented it.
Right. And I don't know if you are aware, but in Florida is a very easy way of discriminate to people by interviewing families before renting. And we never know what the interview result is about.
Well, but Florida is its own little creature, so
right, it's an elegant way of discriminating and a modern way as well. Also, we have few questions about evictions. What the process is. I think Spanish people tend, and I think minorities in general. Generally, I think we are low, moderate income. Right? The majority.
Right.
Not everybody, but the majority. So we are scared to lose the place that we actually can afford. Or we probably been living there for a long time. In the Spanish side, we also have people that are non-citizens, right? And they're scared of immigration and all that stuff. How is the eviction process handled by the housing court? How is handled?
Okay, so, I tell people being evicted is not a crime. It's just a issue of circumstance, right? So even if you are undocumented, you still have a right if you're paying rent and you entered into, whether it's an oral contract or oral lease or a written lease, the landlord still is obligated to uphold their portion of the lease, and then the tenant is obligated to uphold their portion of the lease. But I want to start off by saying communication is best. There's no denying that housing and affordability is kind of like not one of the same. Because what is affordability? Is it affordability for low to moderate income, or is it affordability fair market? We know that the Ohio state legislators put into law maybe about a year ago to 2 years ago that no municipality can create a a rent control. Right.
Okay.
Those are so necessary because how does a place like New York deal with the high costs of rental units and living if they didn't put in rent control on certain properties, right? Because then everyone will be homeless. We also know that the United States Supreme Court just okayed for the state of Oregon to now enforce their no sleeping in public. So those individuals that are unhoused can now be fined, and then they can also be arrested for failure to have a place to go besides a park and, you setting up a camp or a tent or laying on car. I mean, they're very specific in the law that was passed in Oregon that, I think the attorneys were saying, the ACLU probably and Legal Aid was saying this is a very harsh, cruel, and unusual punishment kind of law to victimize someone that's already, or criminalize someone that's a victim to their circumstances. Well, the Supreme Court says, okay, so, people have to be mindful. And I loop that around to say you have to be mindful of being active in voting if you can vote. Because it's not just the local things, it's the federal things that shapes everything that is around us, from funding to erasing and eradicating diversity, affirmative action, any of those things that are kind of heritage or specific to race and ethnicity. You just have to be mindful of those things that are coming, because some people will say, well, I don't want to be identified as that. But regardless, you are going to be identified as it, whether you want to or not. So affordable housing, the eviction process, I can say, it all starts from failure to pay rent.
And I want to interrupt you 1 second, because you say one thing that it was very interesting. You say eviction is not a crime. Although the federal government or the Supreme Court is saying, in the other hand, in another state, but probably it will happen across the board. If you're homeless and you don't have a place to stay,
Right.
you can be charged.
Yes.
It's not that contradictory?
Yes. It's very I'm sorry.
Contradictorio.
Right. Okay. I'm going to say that word. It's contradicting about what it is. Because here's the other thing, too. If you know someone is unhoused, and the whole premise, I suspect, because I haven't read the whole release of the ruling. I just was, and a lot of them are being released, including, I think, the last batch of United States Supreme Court cases are being released today. But it was dealing with the Oregon law that was from one of their municipalities that said it's cruel and unusual to charge and criminalize somebody for being homeless. Well, they said, no, it's not, cruel and unusual punishment. Maybe they were saying it doesn't meet that high standard of being cruel and unusual. Well, that's from people that have probably never been unhoused and never had to sleep in a car or sleep in a shelter. What do you do when the shelters are overfilled and they can't allow anyone else in, and there's not enough shelters? We all know there's not enough affordable housing. Affordable housing, and it's a difference. If you travel internationally, you see kind of the greed that we have to come back home to, because I don't think, I went to Bali. I don't think they struggle to pay rent. I don't think people are in it for a monetary gain and to die rich. It's people live, and it's such an open space. Like, they don't enclose a lot of places in Bali. But we think about what's affordable. I mean, what is affordable?
Yeah,
like, what's
affordable
driving it? Right. Affordable to who? So one of the things you want to do is start looking at another argument they could possibly make is dealing with, poverty jail, or those jails where you put people in because they can't pay a fine. And
we're going to continue.
It's a round and round circle. So, you have to think of the fallout of that. And the judges have to think about that when it comes up on a criminal trespass. Well, do they have a place to go? Are they unhoused? And, can we find some resources? So it makes everybody work that much harder, which can be a good thing, I think, because people don't know what they don't see.
Right. And I don't know if you're aware, Josh, there is some places and some states that when you call to do an intake for somebody, and I like that word, unhoused, and you call and you tell them, well, I'm sleeping in my car. Well, you have a place to sleep.
Right.
So you're not considered unhoused.
Right.
I was so... It happens to a family that I know of in Orlando, Florida, and they call because they need to take a bath and they have kids in the truck, and they say, "Well, you're not unhoused. You literally have a place to sleep."
So if I didn't tell you I was sleeping in a car,
then
how far up in the priority list would I become with kids? And it's really impactful for kids, right? Because it destabilizes them. And everyone knows who's ever had kids or nieces or nephew or anybody that stability is so necessary for kids because it teaches them boundaries and expectations. And I feel like crime goes up when there's a large people being unhoused or on the fringe of being evicted. If you've ever been evicted and you're forced to sleep in a car with 5 family members, and now it's summertime, so there's a problem with it being in the 90s with no way to, and you have all your belongings packed in a car, right? Imagine the impact on a kid if it's a single mom, and especially our boys. And if it is, they finally get housing, and again, they're on the brink of being evicted. What goes through the family's mind when you are thinking, hey, I can't go back through living at a shelter, being separated from parents, because they'll say the boys can't sleep in the all-women shelter. And so where are they to go if their father is not with them? Then they have to go to, all-men shelter, which is very unsafe. So these things, I think, not having affordable housing for people to live, it is a trickle-down effect, and it impacts the level of crime that you'll see. that goes on a rise. And it's just stressful to people that are thinking, how am I going to pay rent?
And another thing that came to my mind now that you say, okay, eviction is not a crime. Yeah, I do understand that perfectly, and I agree with you. And I love your sensitivity when you're talking, when you're expressing yourself about this. But then you have people that in order for you to get an apartment, you will get if you have an eviction prior 5 years ago, you will not be able to qualify for that apartment. Is that legal?
Unfortunately, it is. But however, Cleveland Housing Court has a sealing process where you can seal your evictions. And let me just premise this by saying a couple of things. You go, and it was very prevalent, and this process became kind of revolutionary when we dealt with the pandemic and we dealt with emergency rental assistance. And then in order to access that emergency rental assistance a lot faster, sometimes they would have to file an eviction and start the process so that you can go up on the priority list, because so many people were trying to access the emergency rental assistance prior to going to housing court for an eviction, which kind of makes sense. But also what we were dealing with, and by we, I mean the city of Cleveland, and also the housing court, and also the nonprofits that were responsible for getting the emergency rental assistance out. There was no blueprint on how to do this. So we're all at round tables trying to figure out how to create a process while we're fighting a pandemic. People that are coming to work are pretty much concerned about whether or not they can pay rent, possibly, especially in the nonprofit sector, and will they have access to this? And then just keeping staff on to process the millions or hundreds of thousands of applications that came through. So you're dealing with also high turnover. How do we connect? And one of the biggest problems, I know you guys know as a nonprofit, is connectivity, right? Getting information out, getting people excited to come listen to the podcast, right? Or connecting. Connecting, or just coming out to resource fairs where you can get this information. I think in today's time, no one can say, we don't have access to resources. We didn't know. It's how much you want to know. If you feel like something is not right, or you're not being treated fairly, then you got to take the next step and say, this is not right. This is not fair. Even if I'm voicing for me, I'm going to voice for my kids, because your kids are always watching. And I'm going to voice for my community that something just seems not right about this, and I don't know what I can do, but I'm going to figure out what I can do. So I would say, resources are there. And when they file that eviction, even if they dismiss it, that eviction is still there on your record. And so if they do a background check, they can see it. Well, if it was dismissed, you can get that easily sealed by filing a motion. City of Cleveland enacted right to counsel during the eviction process, because you only have a right to counsel, a right to an attorney, when you're dealing with the criminal justice system, right? You're looking at jail time. So it was never done for those individuals that are dealing with civil issues, which is eviction, right? We start off saying civil is eviction. Eviction is civil. And so in 2019, they passed a right to counsel, where those individuals that are facing an eviction that meets the income qualification has a right to an attorney to navigate that process. Because just like the tenant has things they must do according to the Ohio Revised Code, those are the laws that govern the state, and it's the landlord-tenant laws. And usually a landlord come in there with their attorney, right? You come in there as a single mom by yourself, and you're like, this is my first time I've ever been to court. This is the first time I've ever experienced eviction. And there's some things that went on that I feel like I need to tell the court. Well, legal aid can now help you navigate that. And then I want people to feel comfortable. I feel like everybody has a right to be heard. Their voice is their voice, even through the eviction process. So I tell people, don't ignore those slips for you to report. And the court set up a process where you don't have to drive down, find and pay for parking, come through a building, come through security, catch the elevator, and come into a court. I felt like housing court should be community-based oriented,
right,
and that people should feel comfortable in the environment so that their voice can be heard, which is why I'm still virtual. I know that parents are taking kids to school, they're trying to get to work, but now that it's a virtual hearing, you can take a quick break. Right. And jump onto your hearings and be heard. So that was one thing that I want to continue to have, because I want people to be able to know that they can have their day in court. And you can tell, this landlord has not done this. Yes, I haven't paid rent, but I've been saving my rent, right? I also want to tell people, do not pay your rent. If you are living in a house that, the tub is leaking and you have water stains on your ceiling, you have a right to file what we say. The first thing you do is give the landlord a 30-day notice. However you've been communicating, whether it's text message or email or a phone call, document it and say, hey, my toilet hasn't flushed, my water hasn't been working, I need for you to come fix it. And they have 30 days to come and make those repairs. If they fail to make those repairs, you have every right to come down and do what we call a rent escrow, which is pay your rent. A lot of people say, oh, well, this house is horrible, I'm not going to pay rent. Well, the only thing you're going to do is get quickly evicted, because it's no defense that you're living in unhealthy environment, because you're still living there. And how would anyone know it's unhealthy but for you bringing it to someone's attention? That's bringing it to the landlord's attention, and then also bringing it to the court's attention.
So two things. Is actually valid for somebody to communicate with the landlord using their text, WhatsApp, or one of those tools that will be considered like a proof?
A lot of people communicate via text message. I mean, when I look at some of the evidence submitted, a lot of it is text message back and forth. That's however you communicate, but you just have to provide proof. And sometimes text message is better than a telephone call, because unless you're recording a call, how else would anyone know that you told the landlord? So sending them a letter in the mail demanding that they make the repairs and those things. I'm going to jump real quick back to sealing of eviction records. And so when you got the emergency rental assistance and your rent was paid and the case was dismissed, you do have a right to file a motion to seal the eviction, and the cause will be because of the dismissal, right? But if it is where you hadn't paid rent, they granted the eviction, and then they granted the civil damages. Because the civil damages can include anything from all the back rent you haven't paid to if you cause damage to the property. Okay. And I just want to say, I say this to everybody, if you're mad because you're being evicted, do not damage the property that you live in. One, it takes a property off the market for someone else, which is always already a housing shortage. And then two, you could possibly face criminal charges for vandalism of someone else's property, because some of the damages that I've seen it looks very intentional. The only reason why you're not facing vandalism charges is pretty much because the landlord doesn't want to go and pursue it. But they have every right to. They do it in the suburbs real fast, because I've prosecuted those cases, and they're felonies when it's like, over $5,000 worth of damage. Oh, okay. It becomes a felony in the 5th degree, 4th degree, depending on how much damage you cause to that property. So I do warn that, if you're evicted, you're evicted. But how do you stop evictions? One is communication, right? Some people just don't pay rent and then they go off the radar, and the landlord doesn't know one way or the other, what's going on, why you stop paying. We all have hard times, but then you can go and
we also in our rental housing counseling process, we make sure that people understand, is that a fair rate for you to pay? Because we probably want to this house because it's in this place and this place, but we can really afford it, and eventually it's gonna catch you up. So I think that's an important thing.
Right.
I want to take a minute to speak Spanish a little. Y nos da un brequecito solamente para anunciar que hoy estamos tomando cafecito de la Villa Bakery aquí en la 44. La dirección la voy a proveer ahora, 3216 West 41 Street en Cleveland, y el número de teléfono es el 216-659-9610. Y ellos nos trajeron estos quesitos y unos bizcochitos de maíz que están bien buenos. Aquí seguimos ahora con unas preguntas que le enviaron a la juez, y una de ellas es bien importante. Judge, I'm going to ask you 3 questions that our audience sent. One of them is, this person rent an apartment, and I'm sorry, but I'm just translating as best as I can.
And I just got to do this disclaimer.
Sure.
So hopefully if you can say it, ask it in a general term so
Sure.
that I'm adhering to my judicial code of conduct, so to not discuss any cases pending before the court. But if it could be just a general question about what this person is
Sure.
asking, and I don't know the names of anybody, so...
Okay, and I will not mention either.
Thank you.
Basically, what they want to know, if when you are ready, I'm a landlord, I have 2 properties, I haven't conduct the let, I should say the let test or
Right.
inspection or whatever needs to be done in a property to make sure that that property is free of lead. That needs to happen before the person actually rent the property, or is not necessarily like a regular policy protocol to follow?
So the Cleveland Codified Ordinance took effect in, I believe it was passed in 2020 also. Right to Counsel passed in 2019, but it took effect July 1st of 2020, right at the height of the pandemic.
Right.
And so the lead passed, I believe, in 2019, but they did not start enforcing it until 2022. Which meant, and then they did a very slow enforcement to where certain zip codes had to be, the property had to be lead inspected. And these are just rental units, not your personal unit or anything like that if you're not renting. And so by the end of 2022, everyone should have had their property inspected for lead. But of course, we know that's not true because I still have a lot of properties on my criminal docket where they have not gotten those lead safe assessments and that lead safe certificates. And those certificates are usually good for like 2 years. Can they not rent the property? What's going on now with the new changes in Cleveland Codified Ordinance and the passing of Residents First legislation, to get your rental registration was the main thing that everybody cared about, because if you don't have your rental registration certificate saying, hey, I'm, Scott LLC, I'm renting 3 properties, and for each property I have to register them not only with the county, that's automatic, but with the city of Cleveland as rental properties and pay the $70 fee. It was just a mechanical process, right? It's good for 1 year, and every year March 1st of whatever year it is the day they expire, and you should have your new one for the following year.
Okay.
So if you didn't have that, the consequence is you can't evict anybody if you don't have your rental registration certificate.
Okay.
You can't come in court because there's certain things you have to prove in your complaint. 1, that you own the property, ownership. 2, that you are an LLC that's in good standing with the state of Ohio, because you got to register every LLC with the Secretary of State. And then 3, you have to have a rental registration certificate. The 8th District Court of Appeals said that we cannot require the lead safe certificates, that's a criminal matter, and it's not part of the landlord-tenant requirements to prove proof of ownership or that you're in compliance with the code. So you have to have your rental registration, but you have to have your lead safe certificate now. They're requiring a couple of things. You have your lead safe certificate and that you're updated and up to date with your property taxes in order to get a residential rental registration.
So let me ask you this. Can a tenant actually go and ask the landlord for those certificates? Like, let's say I'm going to rent a property and I will say to my landlord, are you registered with the city of Cleveland as a landlord? Can I go ahead and ask them that?
Yeah, you can. You can ask them, but you can also access it on a public website.
Oh, it's public records.
It's public records with the city of Cleveland. It's a little bit hard to navigate, but I know they're overhauling their computer system or case management system. So I'm not sure how accessible it is. I would hope it's a little bit more modernized and updated. I think it is going to be. But because they're now re-registering a lot of them. But yeah, you can say, hey, do you have your rental registration, your lead safe certificate? Okay. I don't know how landlords will feel about that, but they shouldn't feel any kind of way. But you know, they're supposed to have it. It's also a good way to make sure that the person who's renting the house owns the house, right? You can always go look at the treasurer's department.
Right.
And you have to determine if the person you're talking to is a property manager or actually the landlord owner. If they're the property manager, say, are you representing the property owner? This is just kind of helping people not put down deposit and first month rent to a scammer that doesn't even own the property. The property's just been kind of vacant, and then they find out they never gave me the key. I've never had access to it. That person they're not even out of the state of Ohio, could be outside of the United States. So a lot of things going on that is out to take everybody's money. So,
and I would love for you to come back for us to discuss specifically property management, because we hear a lot of challenges for clients here but that's another day.
Okay,
that will be another day. The second question is, can a landlord evict me of a property without the legal process? And I'm sure it's not, but I want to hear from you as a judge.
So you cannot evict on your own. It's constructive eviction, meaning you can't change the locks. You can't board up the windows.
You know that happens.
Oh, 100%. I'm 100% certain, because we do the TROs, so the restraining orders. But if you are being constructively evicted, the water's being turned off, the lights are being shut off. I'm surprised at how many people live in a house that don't have running water. It's no way possible you can survive, because how are you sanitizing anything and cooking and prepping food?
It's a health issue.
But I think it's because people are fearful. And so when you come to Cleveland Housing Court, and this, you do have to come down to the Justice Center on the 13th floor. Our housing specialists are there to assist you and to walk you through the process, because what you'll end up doing is filling out a request for a TRO, and also a motion to compel, kind of like turn the lights back on. Sometimes it can be done right then, because once you fill out that paperwork and file it, they will call the landowner if they have a way to contact. So you always want to have contact information of the landlord bring down. But they'll call them and then tell them they have so many hours to turn the lights back on, or to turn the water back on, or to give keys to the new locks and allow them to come back in, because there are consequences for landlords doing that. And a lot of times it's financial consequences.
Okay, and that hurts.
Yes, it does. And it's the weight of the court that's moving it. So you're pretty much going to be served, if possible, if they're local, by the bailiff, our bailiff department. I'm not sure if there is any laws that's being passed in residents first legislation, But when you intentionally lock people out of their homes and then they're scrambling trying to figure out what to do, because I think a lot of people don't know what to do.
Right.
Usually in 14 days, there's a hearing scheduled with my magistrates about what's going on with the property, and informing the landlord that they're prohibited from doing that. If these are realtors or real estate agents that own these, you can really go after their license. Disciplinary actions for doing that. So,
at least in here, we have clients that come in here and let us that's happening. And the last question that I have, and you mentioned a little, that the people that might be facing eviction have the right for a cancel. Right. For Spanish speakers specifically, they will have access to an attorney, a lawyer that actually speaks Spanish, or you are not aware if that happens, or what is the translation process?
It can be, legal aid can have their attorneys to speak one-on-one with them as they discuss their case. But when they come before the court, if the attorney asks, or even if they ask, I need an interpreter because English is not my first language. I don't really understand some of the legal terms. The court is obligated to provide an interpreter for them. And I, would want an interpreter because, like I said, everybody has a voice and a right to be there. And you're taking away a fundamental right to housing, although some people will argue there's no fundamental right to housing, but it kind of is. It's kind of necessary to have housing, and you have to be able to articulate what's going on to the court, that you haven't paid rent, or if there's some concerns that it's about, or that you've paid rent and the landlord is not being as truthful as they should be.
Right, and taking advantage of the language barriers.
Right.
Which I'm sure it happens too. I just want to mention that Judge Scott, we met briefly at the city, and she's really, really passionate in what she does, and she wants to connect with you guys and with the Spanish community. It was important for her. So I think we have a very good chat today.
Yes.
I want you to informally invite you again, and we will coordinate. And I'm really, really happy that you took your time, that I know is very valuable, to speak to our audience.
Oh, thank you. And I just want to say, I will, by the end of this year or next year, complete my first term as housing court judge. So I will be back for a second term, so that's coming up soon. But I don't do this just to be elected. I do it because I understand, as someone that grew up in low-income housing, that how important housing is for everybody. Regardless, but more importantly for kids, for the children, regardless of us moving a certain way as a single individual. But when you bring babies into this factor, you want them in a safe, healthy, whole environment so that they can have a shot at, growing to be the best person they can be.
Right. And it's good to mention that in 2019, Moná Scott made history as the first woman elected to be administrative judge. So you will go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, everybody, thank you for listening to us. Y pasé la prueba en inglés. Connecting and Café. Dímelo, Cleveland.